Hello all, welcome back. We're going to talk a little bit about emotion action tendencies. This is a short one. Proton's going to help us out, obviously. I guess that's the deal. Cats are going crazy today. As many of you have probably noticed here in Columbus, at least, the weather's getting quite a bit warmer, and we got some windows open, and that just makes the cats act all strange. Right, Proton? So today we're going to talk about emotion action tendencies. It's a short lecture. It's kind of a narrow kind of phenomenon that we're going to talk about here, but one that I believe to be critically important. So let's take a stab at it here. Maybe line that up a little more. That's better. Okay. So let us begin, and in fact, OH, right? And you shouting out IO at home and having people look all strange at you. Notice these lectures through 8 are numbered super wacky. We got a whole bunch. There's like 5 or 6 lectures that start with 8. So you got 8.05, 8.1, 8.2, 8.25, I believe. So it's all pretty wacky. Here we are, Ethiopian contingent, show Buckeye pride at the National Scout Jamboree. So, emotion. Emotion, where the action is. At least that's the way I'm putting it. Let's assume that emotion is a 4-part process, and many people describe emotion that way. Physiological arousal, cognitive interpretation, subjective feelings, and behavioral expression. You can make a strong case that these are the 4 components of emotions. And emotions have evolved to help us respond to important situations. And that's really the theoretical position that underlies a great portion of this lecture. It allows us to respond to important situations, and at the same time then it conveys our attentions to others. So we have kind of that dual process there. Now, I think we've shown this before in class, and if I remember correctly, I told you not to try and memorize all of it. It's the theories of basic emotions, and we probably discussed this when we discussed Ekman, if you will. And notice Ekman's still on the list. He hasn't gone anywhere. What did Ekman consider criteria for it being a basic emotion? Well, in fact, that it is generates a universally recognizable facial expression. Okay? But we notice that Plutchik has a relation to adaptive biological processes. And here, Arnold, really, relation to action tendencies, that's where we're going to kind of look at today. You'll have to excuse me for a minute. I think the cat's got its claw stuck in the blind over here, so I need to... Ursula, are you okay, sweetie? Okay, you're all right. That's fine. Best to be proactive about these things, unless she wants to tear all the blinds down, and that's a big pain in the ass. So let's talk about emotion and action tendencies. And here we've got some people who are big in the business. We got Elliott Smith, we got Dr. Keltner, we got Diane Mackey, Theory Devos, and Jennifer Lerner going on around the loop. I have a small connection to Jennifer Lerner. We've only met like once or twice. But Jennifer Lerner was a graduate student under Phil Tetlock's supervision, as was I. So it kind of gives us this kind of strained linkage when you share an advisor in graduate school. Regardless, what do we know? If we want to approach the idea of emotion-action tendencies, what we're talking about now is we're not going to use terms like positive and negative emotions. We're going to use avoidance and approach basically as the language to describe or categorize emotions. Fear and disgust lead to avoidance. That's pretty simple. If I'm afraid, I might want to back off or somehow run away. If I'm disgusted, then in fact that causes an avoidant reaction as well. Disgust is cool, you know, because remember, you wrinkle up your nose, you close your mouth sort of, and you exhale, and you rock back. And this is all effectively designed to take us away from the noxious, disgusting stimuli. Right? Now, let's play this out kind of in a larger picture. What do we have then? Fear and disgust lead to avoidance. Fear also leads to risk avoidance specifically. So a lot of times they'll use gambling paradigms in the laboratory and give people an opportunity to gamble, but they've primed them into an emotional state first. And then they study their gambling behavior. Do they avoid risks or do they approach risks is kind of the simple paradigm there. Happiness and anger lead to approach, and this is where positive versus negative emotions comes into problems with the classification system. Because look, anger is defined as or classified as a negative emotion, happiness is a positive emotion, but both are approach emotions. So what's more important in our theorizing about emotions? Action tendencies for many of us is really the criteria, so we look in terms of emotions as approach and avoidance. Now, anger is a little more complicated than that, because we know that anger will lead to approach, but it only leads to approach if I believe that I'm going to be successful in that approach. At least that is for people who are doing the higher level cognitive processing. Now, people who've maybe had some inhibitory failures due to drug use or fetal alcohol syndrome, etc., may in fact not possess the same level of inhibitory processes and may not be able to inhibit an anger response. They get angry and they just go off, right? And notice that anger management training is often designed to help people learn to inhibit their emotional responses before they create costs that are maybe too much of a burden to pay. Anger will also lead to risk-taking, and what we see here is in these same kind of gambling paradigms by Lerner and Keltner, you piss people off, that is, you prime them to be angry, and then you give them an opportunity to gamble. They will risk more money and they will gamble less prudently than someone in the control condition. Now, my dissertation research we'll talk about later in the course when we talk about research and how research is done regarding emotion, but what we found in a nutshell was that both approach and avoidance are also influenced by cultural expectations. So if we're expected to approach in a certain situation, then we will, and if we're not expected, if we're expected to avoid, then we will likely do that as well. So there's this fascinating cultural component that probably operates under the radar, that is non-consciously, to affect our behavioral choices, at least one criteria that affects our behavioral choices. One of my favorite all-time pictures. I don't know how this happened, but I'd love to be in my kitchen and see this looking in the window at me. The view out of my kitchen is my neighbor's yard, and I would prefer this view, but that's an aside. So, let us then talk about intergroup emotions theory, because when we're talking about approach and avoidance, we combine the concept of emotion. Then how do we describe intergroup behavior? And that is behavior between groups. So we start with a mental representation of the self becomes significantly tied to the in-group image. So as a group member, then I begin to self-stereotype almost, or maybe not almost, as a member of my group, and I start to behave in a way that's more consistent with that image of myself that is group-inspired. So the individual cognitive appraisal process expands to incorporate group-level needs, desires, and reactions. That is, because I become a member of a group, then many of the desires, wants of the group become mine as well. And this is all becoming tighter and tighter with the group, as we've discussed in previous lectures. Emotions that are a result of the appraisal are experienced by the individual on behalf of the group. So this is another way that emotions are transmitted within group settings. Appraisals and experienced emotions allow for predictable patterns. That is, over time and observations, we see, people are creatures of habits. That is, they will enact essentially the same behavior when they are appraising a stimulus as being similar to warranting that behavioral response. Action tendencies then are related to experienced emotions, again in a predictable way. So as groups generate anger, let's say at another group, so the in-group experiences anger at the out-group, then this can facilitate the in-group's approach towards the out-group to somehow make them pay for causing the in-group members to be angry. And this can be through attack, retaliation, any number of mechanisms, confinement, whatever it is. So one of the components then is if you want to get your group to move against another group, one of the best ways to do that is to get your group pissed off at the other group. So you craft a narrative, and remember we've been talking about narratives, you craft a narrative that justifies my anger towards this group. And notice how effectively Hitler did this in 1930s Germany, actually even into the late 20s. Germany enters into a depression. There's unemployment, there's rampant inflation, and what Hitler did was chose a convenient scapegoat. That was the Jews and the communists. And the idea was to get people pissed off about the Jews. Look at those Jews, they're controlling everything. Look at those Jews, they're oppressing us. Look at those Jews, they're responsible for the fact that we can't even afford to eat. And this then facilitates the in-group to attack this out-group, the Jews, because of the anger. So anytime you see a leader, cult leader, what have you, any kind of leader beginning to talk smack about another group, it's to generate this anger and to increase this approach tendency. Now it could be physical approach, that is actually going up and beating people, which is done, and we've seen evidence of that recently. When we call the coronavirus or COVID-19, when we call it the Chinese virus, this is an intentional act. This is not a Chinese virus, it's COVID or it's coronavirus, those are the proper names. But if we relabel it the Chinese virus, what we're doing is facilitating this anger at the Chinese, oh those damn Chinese. And now we even have stories that the Chinese invented this virus to get even with the United States, all these conspiracy theories. But ultimately, it's all designed to get us pissed off. And if we get pissed off, then we'll approach. We're gonna, and we've heard a couple instances where Asian-looking people have been attacked on the basis of their Asianness, right? Because this anger has been generated towards Chinese and or Asians. And that's how you facilitate this. Now notice, approach could also be designed through legislation. And that puts people on board to craft legislation that somehow harms the other group. So it doesn't necessarily have to be physical violence directly from the individual. It could be group level policy making that is aggressive towards another group of people. But it's facilitated by anger. So if someone is delivering a message and trying to get you worked up and trying to get you angry, you might want to step back and say, what are they doing? Why are they doing this? Why do they want me to be angry at these people? What are they trying to accomplish? And hopefully, as we gain knowledge of emotion and how it affects us, we become better consumers of the information we're being fed. Great book, if you will. It's an edited volume, so a bunch of different researchers, each have a chapter in here, Prejudice and Intergroup Emotions. Really fascinating book. It's getting a little long in the tooth. I mean, it's a little older now, but it's still definitely worth a read. And it would inspire people who want to do research in the area of prejudice and intergroup emotions especially. Now, let's look at another basic model of emotion, intergroup. Not intergroup emotions, but this is really kind of an integrated view of emotion, the circumplex model. And let's go back to that crazy question, what constitutes a basic emotion? Well, in terms of the circumplex model, and this is really credited to many researchers, I think, not just a single researcher or single research group. When we look at the circumplex model, one thing we notice right off the bat, oh my God, isn't it pretty? The rainbow colors aside, let us then take an idea, let's look at the idea of the circumplex model, and I love the circumplex model. Unlike Ekman, who posited 6 or 7 basic emotions, the circumplex model posits 8 basic emotions. So let's think about what the circumplex model does. First of all, it gives us 8 basic emotions, but it acknowledges the idea that emotions vary in intensity. And when we see the variance in intensity, what we also see is a relabeling of the emotions. So for example, if we look at anger, anger is the basic emotion. So in this internal ring, that's the basic emotions according to the circumplex model, and there's 8. If we look at the intensity manipulation though, anger is the basic, annoyance is mild anger, right? And then rage would be full-blown anger. So this is one of the beauties of the circumplex model right off the bat. Next fascinating feature of the circumplex model is it describes how emotions become blended emotions, or at least makes a case that blended emotions exist. So what we can see here is, let's suppose that I'm saddened and disgusted by something I did. I've got a complex emotional experience. Well then that leads to an experience of remorse, because I'm sad that I did this and I'm disgusted that I did it, so it combines both those ideas. Or let's go to contempt, and remember contempt was was Ekman's 7th basic emotion. In the circumplex model it's not basic, it's blended. And see if you can kind of feel this out and make this case that, boy, combine anger and combine disgust, and you get then contempt as the blended emotion. So the circumplex model is great for understanding the relationship of emotions to each other and also understanding how emotions are labeled in the variance of intensity. And you can follow the wheel around. You can see it's not dissimilar from Ekman. Let's start here. Anger, one of Ekman's basics. Disgust, one of Ekman's basics. Sadness, one of Ekman's basics. Surprise, one of Ekman's basics. Fear, one of Ekman's basics. Joy, happiness, one of Ekman's basics. But notice the two that Ekman did not include in his basic are anticipation and trust, right? And his contempt, of course, was the seventh basic, is out here as a blended. So different emotion researchers are simply going to approach this differently, and they're going to give their rationale for doing so. And one of the confusing things about the research in emotion is generally the rationale is well supported and makes good sense. So it's not cut and dried, you're right, you're wrong. Not so much. It's like, wow, I can see that you can make a strong case for this, but you can also make a strong case for that, and you can make a strong case for something else as well. So I warned you, emotion hard to pin down. Now, basic emotion, basic tendency. And this is, let's return to this idea of action tendencies. What do we know? Well, let's go down the table. Anger leads to approach. Pretty straightforward, and we know that we can sometimes qualify that. If I believe the approach is successful, then I will approach. But if I believe the approach could harm me, then I will probably avoid the approach, right? And bite back on my anger or suppress it, so to speak. And remember the conversation last time, suppression versus repression. In this example, I'm using the word suppress precisely. It's a conscious decision not to show that I'm angry, or a conscious decision not to show, to act on my anger. Fear, avoidance, more on that later. Happiness, right, is approach. Disgust, avoidance. Sadness, though. Now, sadness presents our interesting case. Stationary, and I like to think of sadness as, wow, I become sad, I've been thinking about something, I notice something doesn't meet my expectations, it makes me sad, and it kind of fixes me in place. And the adaptive value of sadness is, say, why am I sad? Why am I feeling this way? What can I do to diminish my sadness or get over it completely? And then this inspires thought. But see, stationary for thinking kind of makes a sense, right? Contempt, avoidance, surprise, but notice we're stationary. An expectation has been violated, at least that would be the stimulus that's most likely to generate surprise. I expect something to go this way, all of a sudden something's going differently, I'm surprised, it freezes me in my tracks momentarily so I can assess and I can reappraise the situation and then maybe understand why this has occurred. And then if I can understand, then I might classify it as not a surprise, but now I have the ability to explain it. And then trust as an approach emotion, and you can see why that might then belong on the circumplex model as a basic. Now, emotion is information. Another way this is put is affect is information, and but you know the difference when we're talking the difference between affect and emotion. So in this case we're saying emotion is information. It works both ways. We experienced emotions, the felt emotions impel us to move, remain still. Simple is appetitive, uncertain, or aversive responding. And again, appetitive is approach, uncertainty would be stationary, and aversive would be avoidance. So different terminology that makes it a little more biological in this case. So felt emotions impel us to either approach something that we like, that is, we might have an appetitive relationship with a piece of cake. Oh my God, that looks so good, I can't stand it, I have to eat that, right? Or aversive responding, oh, I don't want any part of that. Right? And uncertain is, let me gain more information so that I can then understand what it is. Observed emotions, that is, not what I'm experiencing, but what I observe, right, act as cues for potential movement choices. So when we talk social referencing, this would be using an observed emotion as information as to how I might respond or how I might capitalize on a situation if we're looking at the adaptive value. So it's especially informative when situational ambiguity increases. That is, I don't know what to do, what should I do? Now, a couple features here. The perceptual effect of emotion that also has something to do with action tendencies. Emotions that are thought to narrow our perception, that is kind of tunnel our vision, right, would be anger, fear, disgust, happiness. All of these you can see, you can make a strange case this would narrow my perception, right? Now, broadening perception, I'm going to put a question mark to sadness, because often when we see people who are experiencing sadness and grief, their attention is relatively narrowed as a result. But also though, if we're looking at sadness as a cue there's something wrong and I want to investigate alternatives, we can see where it's broadening. So sadness really kind of represents a problem here. It's kind of ambiguous. Curiosity and awe probably are broadening perception. Now, how might you look at this? And then we can look at this. What letters or letter is represented here? What do you see? And you usually say this straightforward. What do you see? And people will say a bunch of H's. Okay, that is a narrow attentional focus. That is a bunch of H's. But if I say a T, then it's a broad perceptual focus. Right? What's this? And you can see it's the same kind of paradigm. So it's a way to kind of get an attentional set, if you will, and perceptual set in the laboratory. Actions, consequences of anger and fear then. Well, narrowing perception, narrowing of attention for anger, incomplete survey of evidence or alternatives. So as we get angry, the prefrontal cortex starts to shut down and we're not able to do adequate cost-benefit analysis. Diminished ability to perform cost-benefit analysis, right, and lessened ability to inhibit responses to the point where we get so angry we explode and we're no longer in control. Right? Results of fear, what do we see? Tendency to rely on past successful behavior. How the hell did I get out of this before? Let me duplicate that action. Or avoid the problem altogether. And we're going to cut this off. We'll pick up here in just a minute. So